everybody. Hello, welcome back. Laura, you were super kind. So Vehan, thank you so much for all your statistics. I'm not going to keep it real. I'm going to show you lots of pictures, and hopefully it's going to keep you captivated. So what are we going to be discussing in the next half an hour or so? We're going to be looking at digital transformation. That's a catalyst and an enabler for financial inclusion. We heard earlier on how important it is. We're going to talk a bit about where we are today and what does the future look like from a consumer and a lender phase, very important. We're then going to talk about the importance of identity verification because it is a catalyst and a verification process toward digital financial inclusion. And then we're going to move into the more riskier stuff in terms of, digital has risen, it's going to continue, it's going to amplify as we continue going globally, locally. However, it's also rising another channel, a riskier channel. But it's not doom and gloom, because the reality is, once we understand what it is we need to do, we need to understand what and how we go about bringing in those securities and controls, we can actually embrace it in a very good way and not be left behind. Cool. So where are we today? From a smartphone usage globally, we've got almost 6.29 billion users activating smartphones. And like you all know, that's your digital wallet, it's your digital identity. It equates to about 86% of the global population. Not a bad stat, right? If we look at South Africa as a comparison, 22 million smartphone users and growing, about one-third of the population. And if we bring it back to Namibia, here, what does it mean from your overall population? There's about 1.2 million smartphone subscribers, again growing. And from an internet perspective, it's about 46% of your population that has access to internet. It's not a bad number, hey? And lastly, if you look at it from a global perspective, it sort of equates to 63% of global from internet usage. Now, there are challenges that Laura introduced earlier on when she opened, but challenges is what keeps us awake. So why is this important, and what has this got to do with financial inclusion? Well, we know the world is moving digitally, and it's important because it allows us to close the gap between developed and undeveloping countries. It allows us to connect with people across the globe. And more importantly, it creates accessibility for the rural individuals and places, especially where it's vast and diverse. And it also helps us gain education, stay healthy, and protect our environment. Now, with digital, there's two phases like we talked about, which is the internet usage. And the challenge for the internet usage, more particularly in Africa, is the fact of accessibility, the cost to service, the infrastructure. And it's for that reason that global mobile phones have actually become the most popular digital trend on our planet. Why? It's easy, it's available, and it's capable of allowing you to be digitally active and to start solving for financial inclusion. So stats are stats, but it's an important reflection of where we are, and I'm pretty sure in the next year from now, it's going to be increasing in the right direction. So all said and done, what does that mean when it comes to using digital in a financial world through payment channels? Now, from a consumer, and like all of us, we're consumers, what's important is that we want to have access to all of this information, and we want to have the availability to do it, right? And I think it's remiss of us if we don't mention that M-Pesa was one of the best examples of the power of technology to reinvent financial services and increase financial inclusion within emerging markets. It also helped pave the way for fintechs to literally take advantage of the proliferation of mobile usage across Africa. And with that, it has become one of the most significant players within a very vibrant fintech ecosystem. Now, that's all well and good. And today there are many more that's doing it, and if we bring it home to you, you've literally got your MobiPay, the Namibian mobile transfer solutions that allows to build and solve for issues and sort of improve or eradicate or close the digital divide that exists. So what does it mean? It means that through payments, you acquire critical mass. When you acquire critical mass, it then introduces a whole host of other services that can come into the businesses or streams, such as microfinancing and lending, and allowing banking to take care. So you start with the payments rail, you move into critical mass adoption through the mobile, and it starts expanding other services that further transform digitalization, and more importantly, inclusion. Inclusion as an individual, inclusion within society, and financial inclusion. So that's a consumer perspective. If we look at the lenders, and there's a fair amount of lenders in the room, like who's actually representing the micro-lending and the banking lending sectors here? Yeah, there's a lot for you. Your challenges are, I have consumers that are wanting all of these solutions. I need to stay ahead. I need to be visible to the rest of the world and my own people. But how do I solve for the risks? How do I manage safety and security and lending within this ecosystem? And more importantly, how do I keep up, right? From a consumer lens, digital equals instant gratification. If I'm going to use this channel, I want to be sure that I'm able to get a decision immediately. I can't wait. Verhan mentioned earlier on in his talk, you order groceries, under 60 minutes it's there. I mean, a lot of you have actually recognized that you shop, you press send, you pay, and within 10 to 15 minutes, your delivery is at your door. That's amazing, right? That's the ecosystem we're living in. So what's different here? The challenge, though, here, it's a little bit more complicated. It's not the same as picking up groceries or bread or milk and, allotting it to you and having it delivered. So with instant gratification, it's important for lenders to have really good, secure, and customer-safe onboarding channels. And what does that mean? It means that, as a lender, you need to, A, introduce this channel, B, you need to make sure that it's customer-friendly, it's easy, it's simple, and it's not complicated. You need to be able to actually create instant decisioning, reducing the risk, the fraud risk, and the exposure that sits there. And guess what? You have to do it online, you have to do it real-time, and you have to do it accurately, and you also have to make sure that it is safe and secure. Small and medium businesses are in no different positions. In fact, the reality of using important data variables is no longer an option. It's no longer a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. And to a certain degree, you'd argue that it's a bit of a survival necessity. And therefore, when these things occur, and you have lenders that have actually worked through partnerships with fintechs, and they've done it really, really successfully. But the reality is there's more data variables that needs to come into the system in order to provide that instant gratification and safe decisioning, as well as protecting and preserving your businesses. Now, in Namibia, you'd find in South Africa and East Africa, this has been rapid progression. Not so much in Namibia, but there's a good focus in terms of what's the next. And it's literally here. It's about how do you manage it, how do you embrace it, and what's proven that when certain things are scalable in a particular market, or when certain things works well in a particular market, it's very easy to scale it into different markets. Right? So all said and done, that's where we are in terms of what does the data points look like and where we are from a digital perspective. Now let's talk about the importance of identities, the importance of identity verification, because that's your proof of life. It actually allows you to believe that, hey, you are Lee Nike, and this is my proof as to why I am Mr. Lee Nike. So why does identities play such an important role within digital transformation and more importantly, financial inclusion. Because, like I said, an identity is something that actually proves you are who you are. However, across the globe, we have to be honest that there are barriers to entry. From a consumer, one of the challenges is lack of identification, and we ask ourselves, but how are we in the 21st century have an issue with a lack of identification? How can we not identify people? There's something wrong. Like, what's up with that? And the reality is it depends, right, where you are. It depends where you are on the globe. It depends where you are on the African continent. It also depends more into the African continent, more particularly the countries we reside in. Where are we? Are we within suburbs? Or are we within rural environments? And how do we manage that urban-rural digital divide in simple things that we take for granted, like registration of births? In an urban environment, it's accessible, it's easy, the infrastructure is there, the support is there, the costs are not so much. When you're in a rural environment and you're living miles away and you don't have a mode of transport and you need to get your child certified, what do you do? When the costs are extravagant, what do you do? And those are some of the reasons why you sort of have an issue with lack of identification. Also, there's a bit of a gender inequality issue. In some countries, it's okay for women not to be identified. It's a male thing, you know? So how do you deal with that? The reality is lack of identification exists. There's the inability to actually have that paper to prove who you are. And then there's a whole host of other biases that are actually that comes into the ecosystem. Another important thing is the inoperability of systems. And why is that important? Because not all countries have an authoritative source. Here, you've got your Ministry of Home Affairs. You've got a database, you know. UNI in March went on to offer web services for passports, for short-term work visas. You're far better than any other country. But if we look at our neighbors or other countries around the world that are developing, there's an issue, there's a challenge. And even if there are infrastructure that exists, it could be inadequate, it could not have all of the services, and this is a whole host of costs that goes into it. And of course, the lack of digitalization into certain infrastructures is a problem, because a lot of the time you're sitting with manual processes, very fragmented, and not consolidated together. So if you want to validate or verify something from an authoritative source, how do you do it where it doesn't show the complete view of the population? It's manual, it's disparate, and there's a lot of issues that's introduced into those processes. And then, of course, we want to move to digitization, and that's like leapfrogging. But again, in environments or countries where you don't have this, how do you do it? The last point around this is accessibility, and we know access is a challenge. For example, barriers to accessibility, to availability, to affordability is not new for Africa. While some countries are mature and doing really well, some countries are really lagging behind. And it's not just an Africa problem, it's a developing country problem. You've got countries with massive population like India. They've done well in terms of creating the Aadhaar system, which is their national people's roll system, and they've worked well in getting from grassroots to moving into a digitalized process. But that all takes time, investment, money, and support, right? And then last but not least, why identification is an important issue for us is that we've got almost 500 million people that lack identification in Africa. 500 million people. And it's a challenge, and when you drill a little bit deeper, it's really around low-income countries that are driving this, where more than 1 in 3 adults do not have an identity. Now that's a lot. Again, in a very progressive 21st century, we still have these problems. And if we then fast track to what we've been talking about, financial inclusion, using digital to be an enabler and a catalyst to financial inclusion, we still have a bunch of people that don't actually have identities. And they're kind of excluded from the ecosystem. They're kind of excluded from life. Imagine you without an ID. It's like, what do you? You can't even get a phone. Can you do anything without? I mean, like, what can you do without an identity? And so that's some of the challenges. From a lending perspective, it's a problem, right? You want to do the right thing. You want to support society. However, how do you have the ability to really know your customer, to be compliant, to validate your customer is who they say they are, proof of identity? You know, how and what do you use to verify? So those are some of the challenges that you're faced with. But it's a challenge you must embrace, and you need to embrace, not just for your businesses, but for society, right? This is a societal thing. And the reality is, in not doing that, you have a whole host of financial exclusion, you get heightened risk exposure, you get collection of documents is not sufficient anymore, you need to verify it, right? We talked about that authoritative source. You have regulatory exposure, and this is an important one, because our economist shared some really cool stats earlier on around cash versus disbursement in secured assets. Home loans, mortgages, and vehicle and asset finance. And the question I have there is a whole host of stuff around anti-money laundering, what's the due diligence, why is this such an uplift, you know, but that's a story for another day. But the reality is it's critically important to have the right processes in place and to manage it. And of course, proliferation of mule accounts. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because you have the individuals that are unable to actually get a bank account because they don't have identification. However, so they use family members and friends that trust. It's interchangeably using bank accounts that's not your own. However, on the risk side, you get the fraudsters and the bad actors that take advantage of it because they follow the vulnerability and exploitation and manage all of those things. So in a nutshell, that's where we are. If I fast track very quickly, how do we overcome these challenges? Because it's not doom and gloom. So we know that, so what? What are we going to do about it? It's really around making sure we have identification systems and infrastructures that supports. We're able to make sure that this investment of technology is supported, the capabilities there. It has the ability to verify the unserved public, include them into the ecosystem, and of course, it's a very good access mechanism. It solves problems for lenders, it solves problems for society, for individuals. Happy, everyone's happy. When you look at the impact to the economy, it's all positive stuff. It's growth, it's access to more services, and all of those nice things. And if we move into minimized risk exposure, the fact that you can ID a person is already a ticket into the game. The rest all becomes due diligence. You're then able to meet regulatory requirements, which is a critical non-negotiable, and more importantly, you start a very thriving economy. So we talked about those two things. What's now important is, so we've solved for one issue, but indirectly or inadvertently, we've literally opened ourselves to other challenges. And again, that's not a bad thing. So why do we see a rise in digitalization equaling to a rise in digital fraud? Now, fraud has always been an issue. Whether it's a manual process, whether it's face-to-face, we've always had this issue. And the reality is fraudsters, be it opportunistic or syndicated fraud, are always out in the hunt. And the challenge, or the scary part, is that they're always ahead of us. So whilst we in organizations looking at what our vision, mission, and values and statements are and how we're going to make money and revenue, the reality is the fraudsters are also doing the same, except they're doing it from a very, illegal type of way. So we at TransUnion do a lot of surveys. Vehan took you through the voice of customer. What I'm going to be sharing with you is a bit of insights from our omni-channel report. We typically send it out once a year. It reflects 2019 to 2022 data. It has a view of all digital fraud attempts across the globe. You look at it globally, you look at it locally, you look at it also from an African continent. So what does that lead us into? So for example, this is the global trend digital fraud attempts for 2022 with the timeline of 2019 into 2022. It's per sector. It's per sector, and it includes all of the markets that we have a footprint in, and it's at the back of data that we see, because we're a data-driven company, and there's a lot of stuff you can do when you have lots of data, right? Vertical agnostic, industry agnostic. And you'll notice there's a whole host of industries that's actually affected by fraud. In fact, there isn't any industry that isn't there. And that's the reality of where we are and how fraud in this world is amplifying and will continue to do so, unless we do something about it. So for example, gaming is an important one, because part of your challenges within Namibia is that you had seen an increase in gaming fraud. But the good thing is that you'll see there's a 7.5% increase. However, there's a negative 21% increase in promotion abuse. That's where, you get hooked into all of these things, and you click into the information, and before you know it, you're defrauded. Why it's a good thing? Because what gaming companies have done, and because it's such a growing concern, they've actually gone super digital, and part of their digital transformation journeys is to make sure that they have the right security, the right controls, and the right environment to marginalize the risks. Telecommunications is another. Travel and leisure is a big one for you. I think our economist indicated earlier on, Theo, when he talked about it. However, on travel and leisure, what's an important call-out is there's credit card fraud of 117%. Now, credit card fraud is basically into two parts. It's identity theft, where your identity is stolen and opened up on behalf of the victim, or you pretend, and then there's account takeover. However, all of them walk into the same type of path. And so when you look at this, it tells you that in some instances fraud's decreasing, but more often fraud is increasing. When we look at what our consumers think, so from a top fraud consumer survey per country, you look at Namibia, talks very similar to what Vehan chatted about. Account takeover, identity theft, stolen credit cards. They're an issue, right? When you look at it between South Africa, Rwanda, Kenya, and Zambia, common threads: account takeover, identity theft, third-party schemes and scams. And that's a challenge, right? And the question is why? And we'll talk a little bit about it now. So now that we know that global trends with local impact requires upfront investment, because we can see what happens as we continue, it's very important to note that this is a strategic, critical driver. And what does that mean? Because fraud is a top 3 operational risk and will continue to be that, it's important from a top level down that you literally have strategies to combat this. And it's also important because if you don't do that, you're going to be sitting with a lot of revenue leakage and you're going to be super reactive. If we look at what is actually the fraud problems in Namibia, Vehan spoke about social engineering. Phishing is your biggest challenge. What it's telling you that out of the population that was sampled, 66% actually fell victim of phishing. They went into a link and they lost money. 13% received it, but they actually didn't do anything with it. It's a problem. Again, very similar in our African countries as well as the global countries. You'll notice a whole host of them have phishing, even in the developed countries. If we move into how do consumers think about security and what's their viewpoint when it comes to digital and interacting on digital platforms, it's simple. 63% would not return to a website if they don't feel safe. If they're unsure and if they have a hesitation that their information is not protected, they don't return. That's a large number. 55% have actually deterred from opening an account due to safety, security, and concerns, keywords. And 48% have abandoned their online shopping cart because they felt unsafe. That's revenue on the table, gone largely because of those issues. So what do we do about it? Consumer education is critical, and there's 2 points. Knowledge is power, collaboration is king. Why is knowledge power? Consumers have the awareness of, digital literacy is important, as well as fraud risk literacy is important, the do's and don'ts, And that is in the control of businesses to make sure that the environments are safe and there's controls in place and it's secure, that provides peace of mind. For the consumer, they've got the duty of care to not misrepresent and be reckless with information. From a collaboration perspective, it's a proven fact that working together and joining forces at an industry level to reduce fraud risk exposure is the sweet spot, and it's protecting businesses, consumers, and communities. So those two are critically important. So, lastly, what are our key takeaways? One, digital transformation is a critical enabler and catalyst for financial inclusion, and we know that's something we can't control. Identity verification is essential, and it is something that will protect the digital world from threats. And lastly, investment in secure digital platforms, plus consumer awareness and education, are proven facts that mitigate current and emerging threats. And at TransUnion, we've got a whole host of services and solutions that can combat this. We've got a lot of thought leadership, we've got a lot of brain and data power and solutions behind it, and I'm really keen for you to have a chat with me in terms of how we can help you make sure that we embrace digital, but at the same time, create a platform for peace of mind, safety, and security. Thank you.